welcome everyone to today's talk by me, JK, Jenny Kate McCrack. Jenny, many names, call me what you will, as long as it is polite, is what I usually say to people. So I'm here to talk to you about nature, grief, and well-being. Just a couple of things before we get started that I'll always cover in any of my talks. So please make sure that you're comfortable. Obviously, if you do need to turn your camera off at any point while you're listening, that's absolutely fine as well. I think that staff from Full Circles will be able to see the chat as well. So if you've got any questions that you think I need to ask that question now so I don't forget them, feel free to pop them in the chat as well. So it is an emotive topic, so just a reminder to everyone about self-care and kindness for yourself through this. Do what you need to do to kind of handle anything that might be emotive for you. If there's any technical issues, touch wood, there won't be, but if there is, then please feel free to try and come back on if you do drop out for any reason, and I'll do the same if there's anything for me. And there will be time for questions at the end of the talk as well. So a little bit about me. My name's JK, as I've mentioned. I have two elements of my business. My core business is called JK Changework, and the bit of my business that is probably the most highly passionate part of it is Where the Mind Grows, which is coaching for teams and individuals out in nature. So helping people to connect, helping them to create health and happiness in their life, really finding themselves in different circumstances during uncertainty and change, where there's a gap between where you are, where you want to be, and I will coach alongside you to help create those change for you. So I am an absolute lover of nature, particularly woodlands, and I'll be talking to you a little bit today about some of my own personal experiences with nature, and particularly how I've been utilising nature through many life experiences of grief, change, loss and uncertainty, and also how nature can be used to enhance your well-being as well. So I'm going to be looking at my personal and professional relationship with nature and well-being. I'll talk to you about nature connectedness. I'll explain the concept of nature relatedness and how as human beings, as part of the natural world, we can relate our own purpose and meaning through nature and nature's wisdom. We'll be looking at how we can be part of nature more frequently, particularly around dealing with grief and loss. And I'll also be introducing you to some natural principles, so some tools that are going to help you to create some wellbeing strategies in your life. And we'll be weaving in throughout how navigating grief with nature and some ideas for that as well. So grief is obviously multifaceted, and you might find yourself relating to one or more of these topics on the screen. And obviously nature can be applied to all sorts of different elements of grief, and we may actually find that we've experienced many of these sort of losses within our life as well. So just to give you a kind of a context of when I'm talking about grief, what we might have lost or the bereavements that we may have had in our life as well. So obviously I'm talking about well-being. What do I really mean by well-being? It's a bit of a buzzword, I think. And for me, it's purely about health and happiness, mind and body. And you can see on the screen the 8 phases of emotional well-being model, which talks about all the influences and the areas in which we can enhance our well-being. But I think in the context of today's talk as well, it's also being mindful of how something like grief or loss can impact one or more of these factors of our well-being in life. So, you know, just to take a few, we may have found that obviously our emotional and mental well-being is impacted. We may have found that we needed time off work during grief or loss, and obviously then that's influencing our occupational well-being. There may be significant changes in your financial situations that may be either overwhelming in terms of inheritance, and kind of often people might feel that's quite an anxiety-provoking kind of thing to be presented with, or of course it might have some financial implications of you. And in terms of social relationships, of course, that would be the key one. So grief really can affect multiple elements of our well-being, and I'm going to talk today about how we can utilize nature to kind of bring back and enhance some of those elements of our well-being, our wholeness, our identity, in whatever way you want to kind of see it, and just kind of chip away, I guess, at the grief and loss. So why nature? This is my opportunity to geek out because I love neuroscience and I love research around nature. So just some of the benefits that nature has on our well-being. So it is researched to reduce feelings of anger, fear, stress and depression. It can also support with pain release and boost the immune system. It can increase our endorphins, our happy hormones, and also provide community and social connection as well. It provides us with that connection, and maybe we return back to a sense of feeling that in grief we may have lost, and can also give us an opportunity to find purpose and meaning. I'll talk today about movement in nature and how significant that might be for us during grief and loss. And I'll also be drawing on attention restoration theory, which describes kind of the way in which nature can naturally change our hormones within our body and help us with things like restoring our brain when it's really been overthinking or overworking. And of course, you might find yourself in the grief process that you know, your brain is just totally kind of full with trying to get to grips with what the reality of the situation is, or even practical things. So attention restoration theory and being in nature can be really helpful. I'll also talk about biophilia, which is our natural synergy with nature, really. It's that sort of unspoken knowing that when we connect with nature, we find it maybe a bit familiar, or we're interested in it, and a kind of sense of awe in some of the beauty of nature, and thinking about the creativity that nature can inspire and the perspectives that we can draw upon with nature. So there's loads of things that nature has to offer for us that can enhance our well-being as well. So I thought I'd just start with a really, really cool fact, because I love this, and it's about getting muddy. So if there's one thing that you can take from today, it's go out, handle some soil and get muddy. So if you didn't already know, that there's natural antidepressants in the soil, in the sort of microbacteria of the soil. And it has the same effect on our neurons in our brain as an antidepressant drug would have as well. So it helps to release serotonin and enable us to be kind of relaxed and happier, which obviously is just a simple way of helping ourselves through time of grief and loss. So I'm going to be asking you, kind of not publicly to share this with me, but just to pause for thought, really. You know, what is your current relationship with nature? So in my world of work and personally, I've had lots of different relationships with nature. As I say, I'm a self-confessed nature lover now, but in the past I stepped away from nature and forgot that it was a useful resource for me. I work with clients who might have never even seen a lamb before, and they have that connection suddenly with nature. And I've got people who would be self-confessed tree huggers and would totally embrace nature as well. So just think about what your current connection is with nature, and if there's something that you could do to enhance that as well. So some of you might be familiar with the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, that talks about the different stages that we might navigate ourselves through when we are experiencing grief or loss. And some of these feelings might be familiar for you in some way as well. I kind of prefer this model, and I don't know if you've seen it before, but I don't think that grief or loss is linear or has a process to it. And you know, this is something it's by Muller Connect, who drew this sort of squiggly diagram there. And I think that that's something that we really can bear in mind, and why one of the reasons I kind of always utilize nature as I have a daily dose of nature is that, you know, when you're experiencing grief or change or uncertainty of any description, that certain emotions can happen in a very disordered way. And I like to turn to nature to think about that kind of principle, and nature does messy very, very well. And this is something that I've really embraced in my own grief journey, but also kind of empowering clients to think about how we get the freedom and acceptance to kind of handle change and uncertainty in the way that's right for us as well. So just think about like the brambly undergrowth, or if you leave your garden for too long, and it will just naturally fill those empty spaces. And it's okay to kind of draw upon a principle like this and give yourself permission that things might not always be ordered or make sense as well. So nature is absolutely everywhere for us. And I just want to remind people really, because I think that it's easy to think that you've got to go and look out at some sort of panoramic vista somewhere like in the films, and that's going to be your ideal connection with nature. But nature comes in many different forms, you know, in our pets, in the ocean, in exploration and challenge. It might be in a local park or your garden. It might even be that tiny little bug or weed that pops up in the cracks of the pavement. And of course, a house plant, you know, everything around us in nature, and we are part of nature. So when you're thinking about how do I access nature, particularly if you're in an urban setting as well, is broaden that horizon to think and be creative about your access to nature. So a lot of what I'm talking about today is based really on the 5 principles and pathways to nature connectedness, which comes from the University of Derby and was adopted by places like the National Trust. And that, you know, we might not be familiar, we might not understand, like, what do you mean by using nature as well-being? And these are just 5 ways that you can do it. So we can connect with our senses, particularly, you know, in times of grief. We might find that different senses are really affected by that, even through the numbness, or, you know, not being able to taste or smell in the same way. It may be that we want to connect emotionally with nature, and I'll talk a bit about that. We can also draw on nature and compassion. And I think particularly in times of grief, that those moments of sharing that compassion for loss and life and death can be really helpful. And I'll be talking about meaning and how we find meaning, both purpose in our own lives and in the wider picture of grief, and also how we draw upon the beauty of nature just in its simplest present way as well. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit first of all about meaning, metaphor and symbolism in nature. So you just have to think how much nature language we use every single day, you know, getting rooted, or we might say something like, I can't see the wood for the trees. And we really actually incorporate nature into our language. But we can also find symbolism and metaphor that might be useful for exploring our well-being as well. So you'll see on the screen a picture of robin, and anyone who knows the traditional Christmas cards often feature robin. A lot of people thought that was to do with the postal service, but it's actually also a representation of death and life and death as well. And the robin is sort of traditionally associated with, you know, a connection with your loved one. And I've even found myself, you know, seeing a robin on a wall and being like, is that you? About someone as well. So I think, you know, find meaning and metaphor in nature can be really helpful for you, and it also helps you just to connect and feel present in that moment. To share a little story with you, shortly after I lost, really, who was a family member to me, but not actually in family lineage, a lady called Judy. And shortly after I lost her, I was away in Croatia, and we were walking down in a massive forest, actually, of Paklenica in Croatia. And me and my partner, Sean, had passed some Sherpas who like get the wood from the forest, and they use donkeys for it. And we walked probably about an hour and a half, and I could hear this bell coming out of the undergrowth, and suddenly in front of us was a lone donkey on its own, which seemed really, really odd. And anyway, as I was sort of looking at it, I was like, that's really strange. And this donkey paused right in front of me, and we connected with each other. Later at dinner, I said to Sean, this is going to sound really weird, but I kind of thought, and he said, you thought it was Judy, didn't you? So, you know, we can find meaning in that. And just to tell you that that is really true, there is the photo of us connecting as well. So how you find meaning and purpose in nature can be very powerful. So as I say, you know, the language, and I didn't think I'd be quoting Dolly Parton in a talk about grief and nature, but we can find that certain metaphors and language around nature can be really, really helpful for us. So storms make trees take deeper roots. What a lovely way to think about how those stormy parts of our life can really create some stability for us. We find new strategies for our well-being as well. So other ways that we can find meaning and purpose, and I can't emphasize this enough, help make something grow. If it's an idea within you personally and you're taking that as a metaphor for something that you're going to do, or even if it's that you have a house plant or something like that, when we're experiencing this really weird warped reality between life and death, where the story's just narrated a whole new chapter for us as we've gone through grief, that helping and having purpose in creating growth can be really, really helpful for you in enhancing your own well-being as well. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about connection now. And firstly, I'm going to turn to draw upon an example that is just, it really talks to us about the connection. Now, I mentioned before about nature relatedness, and this is really around the practice of thinking about how does nature, with its billions of years of wisdom in resilience, in loss, in challenge, in change, it's been surviving all sorts of different sort of feats and unknowns in terms of life and death. So how does nature do stuff is often what I'll be talking about with clients, so we can go and observe, think about nature's strategies and apply them to our own life as well. Now, in nature, there's an amazing connection underneath the woodland forest of mycorrhizal fungi. And this is a sense of community and purpose really in that. So those connections of fungi not only provide air, sources of nutrients, but also communication between each and every one of the plants and fungi within the forest as well. So, for example, if a tree is struggling, it needs more resources, then the mycorrhizal fungi will communicate with the other trees and connect through to resources like water or air to help that tree survive. Every one of those trees knowing that individual tree is essential to that ecosystem in some way. And I really like this idea of, connection and community, who really is your woodland and how can you connect, and who replenishes you, what are the strategies that are going to help you to survive in this new ecosystem that you find yourself. And so I will often talk with clients about, who or what is in your woodland, who are the people that are essential to your connection or your community with yourself, what are the strategies that work for you in that situation. And of course, in finding purpose and meaning and connection with each other, it's very easy to isolate yourself in times of grief. And so thinking about natural principles like integrate, don't segregate, we all need some time apart when we have gone through loss, but finding purpose and meaning, finding a sense of community. And I really will, encourage people to go find some volunteering out in nature, that gives you that purpose, helps you to give back to the community in some way. So nature also offers us some amazing perspectives in terms of managing our own grief and loss, and also moving through those different and unexpected feelings that we might have as well. So for me, it's been about walking, and I'm always just thinking about having one foot in front of the other. And that was really, really helpful to me, particularly in the early times of loss, when I've lost sort of family, friends, loved ones, or even, clients and things like that as well. So there's something psychological in the movement of creating a pace forward as well. And just being out in nature, it's helping us to create our oxygen, our breathing, and create oxygen for us. It boosts endorphins, dopamine, serotonin. And of course, at those times when we might be feeling stressed or low in some way, then naturally through that movement and pace in nature, we get that chance to kind of breathe and help ourselves both physically and mentally as well. And as I say, I have a daily dose. I make sure that, it's my natural prescription ultimately, as I get myself out in nature every single day. So nature's also a place for contemplation as well. And sometimes we just need that space and time for ourselves, and nature doesn't judge, and it's also just accepting that it is who it is. You know, a tree isn't trying to be a fox or a stream. It's just a place where you can be who you need to be. So I always encourage people just to sit in a space in nature, you know, watch the world go by, allow your brain just to process and unwind and unravel, really, take in the sights and sounds or stillness of it. You know, for some of us in grief, a home life, you know, particularly might have an uncomfortable vastness and silence in it. And so we're talking here about a whole different type of stillness and space that maybe feels more comfortable than what can often feel like a silent and uncomfortable place in your home, perhaps if you've lost a loved one as well. So as I mentioned before, you know, biophilia and all this innate connection with nature, and just to remind us all, you know, we're very disconnected from nature, humans are. We've kind of forgotten that we actually are part of nature, and that somewhere in us there is this sense, whether it's switched on or whether it's kind of been put into hibernation for a while, but this sense of just finding beauty and finding fascination in nature and just taking that in. And particularly when you're grieving, you know, it can be very hard to feel connected or present in some way. You might be experiencing some level of numbness in your emotions or feeling dissociated, and just finding and taking in a focus of the beauty of nature and taking in just the simplicity yet complexity of what that natural world looks like can be really helpful. Again, talking about attention restoration theory and, you know, the fact that it's creating these great hormones that can help to calm our mind and body. So we can also think about perspective in terms of whether it's that we're looking practically at what things you can do in nature, or whether it's that you use it in that kind of metaphorical sense of things. So I always encourage people to take that bird's eye view, you know, see the bigger picture. So if you're sat out in nature, a lovely exercise that you can do is to think about, like, what's the bird's eye view of this? You know, begin to look around and notice that bigger picture that's surrounding you in some way. If you're using it metaphorically, it's thinking about that broad expanse of life and death, you know, and actually what steps are kind of on the horizon for you in terms of recovering or moving through grief and loss as well. And then once you've done the bigger picture stuff, it's about noticing the tiny details as well. So again, this might be metaphorically thinking about what are the things that I need to do next? What's that one foot in front of the other thing that I need to do? Or it might be about when you're sat out in nature, really taking your focus into some of the more minuscule parts of nature. And I'll often find myself sort of laid down on the floor, just sort of hands on my head, noticing stuff. I think I get a few weird looks from walkers and stuff, but you know, that's that's fair enough when they come across a random lady laid on the floor, you know, on a path or something. But you know, this can be really helpful in terms of finding that connection back with the present as well. And I think, you know, building our resilience and thinking about how nature builds its resilience. So often we mistake as humans that resilience is about just keep going, you know, that we get a lot of shoulds and coulds, like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, or I should be more engaged with everyone. And actually, if we think about how nature does resilience, you know, a wound will happen and life can still kind of continue around this. And if you just look at where the arrows are pointed, there's some fabulous examples of nature's resilience, you know, to actually continue to grow around physical man-made structures as well. And I like to relate this to kind of the experience of grief, really, is that wound may always be there, that may always be an injury, emotional injury that you return to, but that life can continue to, and you can continue to kind of grow around that. When we're talking about resilience, you know, we're talking about some of the harshest situations and landscapes of our life when we come to grief. So, you know, any of you who've experienced grief will know that suddenly your reality is shape-shifted into something that you just did not expect, even if you were anticipating that that was going to be the outcome. And I really like this natural principle of bend with the wind, you know, be flexible. You may have to learn new strategies for your well-being. And I just again turn to nature to think about how it does that. So the red mangroves trees, that are growing on the side of islands will make their roots really, really thick to survive the waves that are lapping on the shore and help them to protect, you know, the different ecosystems that are there. And likewise in really, really cold tundra as well, we see the sea ice diatom, which actually produces protein that cools the ice and stops it from refreezing, which enables the plants to continue to grow. So we can create these new strategies for well-being that can make a massive difference to our kind of survival and our resilience in our current situation. As I say, resilience is not just about keeping on going, it's about finding rest and stillness. And I always talk with people about finding your pause place. So here I am with my partner, Sean, in a woodland. We found a very rickety, moss-filled bench. And this was shortly after I lost my dad. And, you know, we just found that on a walk and just kind of took some time just to be paused and still and reflect and just take some rest, really, as well. And find those places in nature that just hold that space for you, you know, and give yourself the rest that you need as well. So, you know, engage in the present, find that present perspective. This can feel really hard in times of grief, but actually, being in just that present moment can be very calming for our mind as well. And nature will always just focus on the now, you know. Yes, it has strategies to deal with lots of different changes and seasons, but really it's focused on the now. So I'm going to talk to you sort of about ritual and ceremony. And in nature, this is something that is just naturally there. And we don't have to be religiously minded in some way to create ritual and ceremony when we're navigating our way through grief and loss. That actually, again, it comes back to finding meaning and purpose and creating patterns in our life that are both healing and help our well-being. So nature does grieve. Here is a picture of two elephants who have lost the matriarch of their herd, and they have their own rituals too. And, you know, in the moment when an elephant passes away, they will just find a moment of pause and honor that elephant's life as well. Even in orca families, we see when they have a stillborn orca, that the mum will raise the orca above her head as if presenting it above the sea, and circle before allowing it to rest on the seabed. So rituals are a crucially important part of our dealing with the life and death kind of cycle as well, and thinking about how you can create those and what's going to be helpful for you in your well-being. So everything is a ritual, and know that everything is created. So even every day we create there is a ritual in nature of light and dark. And this was one that was really helpful for me, just to think that everything is really connected. And often me and my family would say about my dad being kind of one of the stars for us and try and figure out which one he would be as well. He always loved Pollux because he could put it into inappropriate sentences with a bit of wordplay. So we like to think that it's him as well. But, you know, noticing that light and shade are part of our own grief process and drawing on that natural ritual and cycle. We can also think about things in a seasonal ritual. You know, every part of the year is in itself a ritual, and nature is set up to celebrate and have ceremonies throughout. So I watched a program recently about a man who'd lost his son in 9/11, and he'd found out during a walk, you know, in the countryside in Somerset. And he's now created for every single year since, he's gone and sort of taken himself on that walk every year in memory of his, you know, his son. So we can find sort of solace in the rituals and the ceremonies, and we can also notice them in nature as well and think about how they will help our well-being. So, you know, the biggest ritual of all is obviously the circle of life. And some of us might find that actually this is a really sort of useful tool of just kind of finding our present self, you know. And as Kirsty Dyer kind of says in this quote, being in nature, one becomes aware of the infinite circle of life. There is evidence of decay, destruction, and death. There are also examples of rejuvenation, restoration, and renewal. The never-ending cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth can put life and death into perspective and impart a sense of constancy after experience a life-changing loss or death. And I think, you know, finding these meanings through natural connections can be really helpful and healing for us through loss. So I just want to tell you a little bit about natural principles, really, and introduce this particular book, which it's a shameless plug, really, because I am a Think Like a True facilitator and do use this in my own coaching processes. But Sarah Spencer, the author of this, she actually founded these principles on her own experience of long-term illness. And I talked at the start about that kind of grief or loss of a part of us. And she talks very openly about the fact that her long-term condition, you know, it was really, she was unable to do certain aspects of life and had to really rethink who she was and how she navigated life in order to keep her well-being kind of at the forefront. And in this book and sort of in the courses and the coaching that I deliver, we draw upon natural principles. So those things that we've observed and learned from nature that we can apply to our own life. And I just wanted to share some of the couple that really stood out for me in terms of the topic today. So know that death is part of life. That can be really hard for us sometimes, particularly when we're in that grief stage, but actually in kind of knowing that and seeing and witnessing that circle of life that happens in nature, and thinking about, you know, the things that we can remember and hold dear to ourselves, but also about how we can kind of create life for ourselves after loss. You know, find slow and small solutions. It's really easy to think that you should be at C when you're actually still at A in terms of your destination. So be kind to yourself and find those slow and small solutions. Nature's very good on actually being as efficient as it can be in order to sustain its life and its well-being. Let it go where it wants to go. So look at all those, you know, wandering roots and plants in nature. And I think in grief, this was really helpful for me, is that some days it needs to go to despair and some days it needs to go into kind of celebration. And that has no rhyme or reason to it. And you only have to look to nature to see how things kind of wander and go where they need to kind of go. And remember to plan for each need to be well supported. So we'll have our own individual well-being needs through times of loss and grief and bereavement. And it's thinking about what supports and helps you to support those needs. And, you know, just going back to the mycorrhizal fungi, is that plays an essential part in the woodland. You know, it ensures that the water is retained, it ensures that communication happens, and it helps to circulate the air and oxygen through it. So thinking for yourself, you know, what are my needs and how are they well supported? As I said before, you know, walking and movement for me has been really important. And life does move. You know, we look at nature and it's constantly moving and changing. And this was a really reassuring natural principle for me, is actually knowing that things do change as well. And sometimes, yes, that's into an uncomfortable place, but actually things do kind of move and shift over time. And live with purpose. You know, it's really hard sometimes to find purpose and meaning, and that's why I've kind of promoted turning to nature, is sometimes that meaning needs to be quite abstract to start off with before you then recreate what your purpose and sense of purpose and identity might be in the world as well. So I wanted to leave you with one last natural principle, and that is love life. And that's something that nature really, really does. You know, in times of challenge and resilience and hardship, it continues to just do and live as it needs to, and love life in those many ways as well. Thank you for listening. Any questions that you might have, you can see the problem with this is I've got the ring lights on me and I get hotter and hotter as the day as I start to talk. So I'd be more than happy for anyone to ask any questions while I grab some water as well. So I'm going to just stop recording now. And if anyone does then want to ask me any questions, I'm more than happy to answer anything as well.